When most people are safely asleep in their beds, delivery drivers are out there navigating empty streets, dark neighborhoods, and addresses that GPS can barely find. What happens when a routine delivery turns into a nightmare? These three real experiences from pizza drivers, food delivery workers, and package couriers will chill you to the bone. My name is Kevin, and I worked as a pizza delivery driver for Tony's Pizza Palace in Salem, Oregon for 2 years. The job wasn't glamorous, but it paid my rent and left me enough time for my community college classes during the day. Most deliveries were straightforward: suburban houses, apartment complexes, the occasional office building. But what happened on a foggy Thursday night in November changed everything I thought I knew about my job. It was around 11:30 p.m. when the order came in. Large pepperoni pizza, extra cheese, delivery to 1247 Maple Creek Road. The address was on the outskirts of town, in an area I'd never delivered to before. Our manager, Tony, looked at the order with a frown. "You sure you want to take this one, Kevin?" he asked, tapping the address on the screen. "That's pretty far out there, especially this late and this fog." He gestured toward the windows, where thick fog had rolled in from the coast, reducing visibility to maybe 20 feet. But I needed the money. Late-night deliveries usually meant better tips, and rent was due in 3 days. I grabbed the insulated bag, checked that I had enough gas, and headed out into the night. The drive started normally enough. I followed the main roads out of town, past the shopping centers and residential areas. But as I got further from the city center, the fog grew thicker. My headlights could barely penetrate the wall of white that surrounded my car. Streetlights became dim halos in the mist, and I had to slow down to almost a crawl. GPS kept recalculating the route as I missed turns I couldn't see. The roads became narrower, transitioning from asphalt to gravel. I was definitely not in a residential area anymore. Tall pine trees lined both sides of the road, their branches creating a tunnel of darkness that my headlights struggled to illuminate. After what felt like an hour of driving through this maze of back roads, I finally found Maple Creek Road. It was little more than a dirt path that disappeared into the forest. My GPS insisted this was correct, but every instinct I had was telling me to turn around and go back to town. But I'd come this far, and the customer had already paid online with a decent tip included. I couldn't afford to go back empty-handed, so I turned onto the dirt road and continued deeper into the woods. The house numbers were impossible to see in the fog, assuming there were any. I drove slowly, looking for any sign of 1247. That's when I saw it. A mailbox emerging from the mist, with the right number painted in faded letters. The driveway was even worse than the main road, just 2 tire tracks leading through overgrown grass toward what I could barely make out as a house. As I pulled up to the house, my headlights illuminated what could generously be called a cabin. It was old, maybe from the 1960s, with peeling paint and a sagging roof. No lights were on inside, which struck me as odd since someone had just ordered pizza. The porch light wasn't working either, leaving the entire property in darkness except for my car's headlights. I grabbed the pizza and walked up to the front door, stepping carefully on the rotting wooden steps. There was no doorbell, so I knocked loudly. The sound echoed strangely in the fog, seeming to come back to me from multiple directions. No answer. I knocked again, harder this time. Still nothing. I checked my phone. The order was definitely for this address, and the customer had specifically requested no contact delivery, which meant I should just leave the pizza and go. But something felt wrong about leaving hot food at an empty house in the middle of nowhere. That's when I heard the sound that made my blood freeze. From somewhere behind the house came a low, mournful howling. It wasn't a dog. I'd heard plenty of dogs during my delivery routes. This was something else, something that sounded much larger and more threatening. The howling came again, closer this time, and I realized it was moving around the house toward me. I dropped the pizza on the porch and ran back to my car as fast as I could. As I fumbled with the keys, I could hear whatever was making that sound getting closer, crashing through the underbrush with heavy, deliberate steps. I managed to start the car and threw it in reverse, spinning my wheels in the mud as I backed down the driveway. In my rearview mirror, I caught a glimpse of something massive moving between the trees, but the fog was too thick to make out any details. The drive back to town was a nightmare. Every shadow in the fog looked like something following me. Every sound from the forest made me press harder on the gas pedal. I didn't feel safe until I saw the familiar neon lights of Tony's Pizza Palace. When I told Tony what happened, he pulled up the customer information on our system. The order had been placed online with a prepaid credit card, but when he tried to call the number listed, it was disconnected. The address existed according to the mapping system, but there were no records of anyone living there. 2 days later, I read in the local newspaper that hikers had found evidence of a large animal living in the woods around Maple Creek Road. The article mentioned scattered bones, claw marks on trees, and tracks that didn't match any known wildlife in Oregon. The authorities advised people to avoid the area, especially at night. I never found out what ordered that pizza, but I know it wasn't human, and I know I was lucky to get out of there alive. I quit the delivery job the next week and found work at a grocery store during normal daylight hours. Some tips just aren't worth the risk.
Maria Rodriguez worked for Food Fast, one of those app-based delivery services that let you order from restaurants and have the food brought to your door. She'd been doing it for 8 months in Austin, Texas, mostly working the dinner rush and late-night shifts when the tips were better. The job gave her flexibility as a single mother, letting her work around her daughter's school schedule. But what happened during a delivery to the East Side changed her mind about working after midnight. It was a Saturday night in December, around 1:15 a.m. Most restaurants were closed, but a few 24-hour places were still taking orders through the app. Maria had been planning to call it a night when a high-value order popped up on her screen. $67 worth of Chinese food with a $15 tip, delivering to an apartment complex in East Austin. The tip was too good to pass up, especially right before Christmas, when she needed every extra dollar for her daughter's presents. She accepted the order and drove to Golden Dragon Restaurant to pick up the food. The pickup was routine. The restaurant staff handed her 3 large bags of food, enough for what seemed like a small party. The delivery address was for Sunset Gardens Apartments on Cesar Chavez Street, a complex she'd delivered to several times before. It was an older building, not the nicest area, but she'd never had any problems there. The drive across town was quiet, with very little traffic at that hour. Austin's downtown area was mostly empty except for a few stragglers leaving the bars. As she got closer to the apartment complex, Maria noticed that most of the streetlights in the area were out, leaving entire blocks in darkness. Sunset Gardens looked different at night than during her previous daytime deliveries. The building seemed more run down, with several windows boarded up and graffiti covering much of the exterior walls. The parking lot was poorly lit, with only one working streetlight casting long shadows across the cracked asphalt. The order was for apartment 2B on the 2nd floor. Maria gathered the food bags and headed toward the building entrance, noticing that the security door was propped open with a brick. The lobby was dimly lit and smelled of stale cigarettes, and something else she couldn't identify. Something sour and unpleasant. The elevator was out of order, so Maria climbed the stairs to the 2nd floor. The hallway was narrow and poorly maintained, with flickering fluorescent lights that buzzed constantly. Several apartment doors had multiple locks and security chains, suggesting the residents didn't feel particularly safe. Apartment 2B was at the end of the hallway. Maria knocked on the door and waited. After a few seconds, she heard movement inside, footsteps approaching the door. But instead of opening it, whoever was inside seemed to be just standing there, on the other side of the door. "Food delivery from Golden Dragon," Maria called out, holding up the bags so they could see through the peephole. Still no response, but she could sense someone on the other side of the door. She knocked again, louder this time. "Hello? I have your order from Golden Dragon. 3 bags, order total $67. That's when she heard the voice, and it made her skin crawl. It was barely above a whisper, so quiet she had to strain to hear it. "Just leave it by the door." The voice sounded wrong somehow, strained and unnatural, like someone trying to disguise their real voice. Maria felt a chill run down her spine, but she needed to follow protocol. App-based deliveries required confirmation that the food was received. "I need you to come to the door so I can confirm delivery," Maria explained. "Or if you prefer contactless delivery, I can set it down. But you need to let me know when you've got it." There was a long pause, and then she heard multiple locks being undone. Deadbolts, chain locks, what sounded like at least 4 different security mechanisms. The door opened just a crack, held in place by a security chain. Through the gap, Maria could see part of a face, just one eye and part of a cheek. But something was terribly wrong with what she was seeing. The skin looked waxy and pale, almost gray in color. The visible eye was bloodshot and seemed too large for the face, with an unnatural, unblinking stare. "Just put the food down and go," the voice whispered again, and Maria noticed that she couldn't see the person's mouth moving when they spoke. Every instinct Maria had was screaming at her to run, but she was a professional. She set the bags down by the door and stepped back. "Okay, your food is right here by the door. Have a good night." She turned to leave, but as she did, she heard the security chain being removed and the door opening wider. Against her better judgment, she glanced back over her shoulder. What she saw made her blood freeze. The person, or thing, reaching for the food bags wasn't human. The arm was too long, with joints that bent in the wrong places. The fingers were skeletal and ended in black nails that looked more like claws. And the smell that wafted from the apartment was overwhelming, like rotting meat mixed with something chemical. Maria ran. She sprinted down the hallway, took the stairs 2 at a time, and didn't stop until she reached her car. As she fumbled with her keys, she could hear something moving in the apartment building behind her. Heavy footsteps that seemed to be following her path down the stairs. She managed to start her car and drove away as fast as she could without actually speeding. In her rearview mirror, she thought she saw a figure standing in the apartment building's entrance, watching her leave. But she didn't slow down to get a better look. The next morning, Maria called Food Fast customer service to report the incident. When they looked up the order, they found several red flags. The customer account had been created that same day with a prepaid credit card. The phone number was fake, and the apartment complex had no record of anyone living in Unit 2B. When Maria drove by Sunset Gardens a week later in daylight, she noticed that apartment 2B's windows were boarded up, and had been for months, according to a maintenance worker she spoke to. The apartment had been condemned after a fire, and no one was supposed to be living there. Maria quit working for Food Fast that same week. She found a day job at a local business and never worked another late-night delivery again. Some orders, she learned, are placed by things that have no business ordering food at all.
James Mitchell worked as an Amazon delivery driver in rural Montana, covering a route that stretched across 3 counties. The job required long hours and lots of driving, but it paid well and gave him the independence he craved after years of working in offices. Most of his deliveries were to farms, ranches, and small towns scattered across the vast Montana landscape. But what happened during a late delivery in February changed his perspective on working alone in remote areas. It was a Tuesday evening in February, and James was running behind schedule due to a snowstorm that had hit the area earlier in the day. Most of his route had been completed, but he had one last package to deliver. A large box containing what the label indicated was camping equipment, going to an address way out in Glacier County. The address was for a property about 40 miles outside the nearest town, up a mountain road that James had never traveled before. His GPS kept losing signal as he drove deeper into the wilderness, forcing him to rely on handwritten directions the dispatch had given him. The road was treacherous, covered in ice and snow with steep drops on one side and rocky cliffs on the other. James had to drive slowly, his delivery van struggling with the incline and the slippery conditions. As darkness fell, his headlights became the only source of light in the vast wilderness. After what felt like hours of driving, James finally found the mailbox he was looking for. A rusted metal box mounted on a wooden post, with the correct address painted in barely visible numbers. The driveway was little more than a dirt path that wound through dense pine trees, disappearing into darkness. As James turned into the driveway, his headlights illuminated what appeared to be a cabin set back in a clearing among the trees. But something seemed off about the scene. There were no lights on in the cabin, no smoke coming from the chimney, and no other vehicles visible anywhere on the property. James parked near the cabin and grabbed the package from the back of his van. The box was heavy, probably 40 or 50 pounds, and awkward to carry. He noticed that the delivery instructions specified to leave the package on the front porch, which was fine with him since he was eager to get back down the mountain before the weather got worse. The cabin was old, probably built sometime in the 1970s or 80s. The wood siding was weathered and gray, and several of the windows were covered with plywood. It looked abandoned, which made James wonder why someone would have expensive camping equipment delivered to an empty property. As he approached the front porch, James noticed something that made him pause. There were tracks in the snow around the cabin, not human footprints, but something else. The tracks were large, circular impressions that looked almost like tire marks, but they were too narrow and went in seemingly random directions around the building. James set the package on the porch and was turning to leave when he heard something that made his blood run cold. From somewhere behind the cabin came a mechanical whirring sound, like a large motor or engine starting up. But there were no power lines running to the property, and he hadn't seen any generators or other equipment. The sound grew louder and seemed to be moving around the cabin toward him. James quickly walked back to his van, but as he reached for the door handle, bright lights suddenly illuminated the clearing from above. Not normal lights. These were intensely bright, almost blinding, and they seemed to be moving in a pattern across the treetops. The whirring sound became deafening, like standing next to a jet engine. James looked up and saw something that defied explanation. A large metallic object hovering about 50 feet above the clearing. It was disc-shaped, with lights running around its perimeter, and it was completely silent except for that mechanical whirring. James fumbled with his van keys, his hands shaking so badly he could barely insert the key into the lock. The lights from above grew brighter, and he felt a strange sensation, like static electricity building up in the air around him. His hair began to stand on end, and he could taste metal in his mouth. He managed to get into his van and start the engine, but when he tried to put it in reverse, nothing happened. The van's electrical system seemed to be malfunctioning. The radio was producing nothing but static. The dashboard lights were flickering, and the engine was running rough. That's when James noticed that the heavy package he'd just delivered was gone from the porch. In the few minutes he'd been struggling with his van, someone, or something, had taken the 40-pound box without him hearing any movement on the wooden porch. The object above him began to move, drifting silently over the treetops and away from the clearing. As it disappeared into the distance, James felt his van's systems returning to normal. The engine smoothed out, the lights stopped flickering, and he was able to shift into reverse. He drove down that mountain road faster than was safe, not slowing down until he reached the main highway. When he got back to the depot, James tried to explain what had happened to his supervisor. But the man just looked at him skeptically and suggested he might be suffering from altitude sickness or fatigue. The next day, James checked the delivery records for that address. According to Amazon's system, the package had been successfully delivered and signed for electronically. But James knew he hadn't used his scanner device during that delivery. The van's electrical problems had prevented him from completing the normal delivery confirmation process. When he tried to research the delivery address, he found that the property belonged to a research company that had been defunct for over 20 years. The company had specialized in aerospace technology and had several government contracts before it mysteriously shut down in the early 2000s. James requested a route change the following week and never had to deliver to that area again. But sometimes, on clear nights when he's driving through rural areas, he finds himself scanning the sky and wondering who or what was waiting for that camping equipment in the Montana wilderness. These three stories remind us that delivery work, especially late at night, can expose you to situations that go far beyond difficult customers or dangerous neighborhoods. Whether you're delivering pizza to isolated forest cabins, bringing food to abandoned apartments, or dropping off packages at mysterious research facilities, you never know what's really waiting for you at the end of that delivery route. If you work in delivery, trust your instincts. If something feels wrong about an address, a customer, or a situation, don't be afraid to leave and report it to your supervisor. No tip, no matter how large, is worth putting yourself in danger. And if you're someone who orders delivery late at night, remember that there's a real person on the other end of that app, driving through dark and unfamiliar areas to bring you your food or packages. Be patient, be kind, and make sure your address is clearly marked and well lit. Because in the darkness, you never know what else might be looking for a late night delivery.